So in case anyone was wondering how I decided to bring up this channel for Eugene Reviews, let's go ahead and look into my history. So it happened like a few years ago where I said to myself, hey, I want to make a movie review channel. And I had all the equipment and stuff, but I guess I couldn't pull through with it because I guess I was camera shy and stuff like that. And a couple years passed and I still had the urge to want to make a movie review channel, but I didn't have enough money to have the equipment for that stuff because I said, man, that stuff is expensive. And a couple years passed and it's 2020 and all of a sudden, oh man, COVID-19 is hitting America. It's hitting the entire world. I'm like, oh man, everything's closing down. Everybody's getting sick. Everybody's dying. This sucks. And eventually I had to work from home. And I said to myself, man, I don't want to play video games and watch TV all the time. I want to make a movie review channel. So I decided I got some money saved up, bought some equipment that I can finally afford. But then I said to myself, oh, I need a clever name for it. Eugene says, Eugene does this, Eugene does that. I don't know what to say. And then I'm like, I'm gonna name it Eugene Reviews because I just didn't want to be movies. It could be TV shows. It could be video games. It could be a lot of other things. And I said to myself, I want to do movie reviews, especially the MCU films, especially the Infinity Saga, because I got the box set of the entire Infinity Saga, all 23 films from Iron Man all the way to Spider-Man Far From Home. And I want to do a movie review of all of those. And now, after 6 months, after my first video review of Iron Man over in May, now, after 20 plus videos later, now we're on to the next movie in the MCU, now in phase 2, at the end of phase 2, and now, we're doing Ant-Man. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen of the world, and welcome to another episode of Eugene Reviews. I am Eugene. And finally, we can say after so many days, the election is over. No, it's not. Nah, shut the fuck up. I didn't get a chance to put it in my previous movie review last week because the results didn't come in time, but the people have spoken, and the projection is that Joseph M. Biden will be the 46th president of the United States, along with his VP, first ever woman, first ever biracial individual, first ever Asian American, first ever Black American running as Vice President, Kamala Harris. But enough about that. It's time to kind of soothe and bring a little more upbeat, uplifting, lighthearted type of vibes to the world. And what film could be better fit to give us those kind of vibes than the 12th entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe's canon, the Peyton Reed directed, Edgar Wright written, Kevin Feige produced, Paul Rudd starring Ant-Man. Now, Ant-Man came out in July of 2015, just after the success of Avengers Age of Ultron. It would mark as the last film of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's Phase 2 edition. As far as my history with this film, I did see this as an advanced screening, I think. I saw this film maybe a week or so before it came out. You know, those whole ordeal where radio stations have contests where people can win advance tickets, first come, first serve, to watch a film like a week or so before it comes out. I got that with Ant-Man. I, along with a friend, a former coworker of mine, went to watch this film at a random AMC, and that was my first and only time watching the film. I don't recall seeing it a second time, but I do remember that it was one of those advanced screening films. Right, so quick cut history on my viewings of Ant-Man. Now let's go ahead and dive into the 3 acts for this next film in the MCU. Act 1, Development. Ant-Man, take 1. So there are actually a bunch of interesting facts to point out when it comes to the development of Ant-Man. One little tidbit that I think a lot of people kind of miss out or don't realize, this film was actually pitched in the 1980s by Stan Lee. If anyone knows the publication history of Ant-Man, of the history of the character, everyone knows that Ant-Man is actually one of the original members of the Avengers. But his name doesn't really ring a bell because he's not big time names like Captain America, like Iron Man, like Thor, like Hulk. But people should know that this guy was an OG member of the Avengers. That's why Stan Lee pitched the idea of having Ant-Man in the 1980s. However, during that same time, Disney released a film that was similar to a setting that dealt with miniaturized people, and it was called Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. So with that cloud kind of lingering over, it was kind of hard to have an Ant-Man film to follow that. But lo behold, 20 plus years later, 20, 25 years later, now we've got an opportunity to make an Ant-Man film, and it's going to be a part of the MCU. So the news broke out around 2012, 2013-ish, that Ant-Man was going to be a part of the MCU's canon, especially a part of their Phase 2. It was announced by Kevin Feige that writer, director, and producer, world-renowned artist and storyteller Edgar Wright was going to be at the helm of bringing this character to life for the MCU. Now, if you've seen Hot Fuzz, Shaun of the Dead, The World's End, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Baby Driver, you know who Edgar Wright is, and you know how big of a gem and how big of a jackpot that Marvel struck with getting this guy. And Wright did so much with it between 2012 and 2013, 2014, developing storyboards, developing the vibe for this film, providing scripts, drafts for this film. But then ultimately around 2013, close to 2014, it was announced that Feige, Marvel, and Edgar Wright would be parting ways due to creative differences, and Edgar Wright would no longer be a part of the project for Ant-Man. He would still get credit for writing the film. However, it is kind of a big letdown to know that this renowned director, this renowned visionary, is no longer a part of the MCU. And it shocked a lot of people too, to an extent where a couple of Wright's associates and friends that were part of the project left as well. Adam McKay, another renowned director who was one of the frontrunners in replacing Wright for Ant-Man, actually respectfully declined that offer out of respect of the friendship he has with Edgar Wright. Ultimately, the film went over to Yes Man director Peyton Reed. And if you can tell already from the acquisitions from Edgar Wright to Peyton Reed, you know that this film is going to have a lighthearted subject to it, a little bit more of an upbeat feel to it. Because you see these other films that are so action-packed, that's so wound up and tense, that's so shrouded in peril. This film felt like it was a nice kind of relieving, more family-oriented, more fun-centric type of vibe, especially in the MCU. And you already know the stars were stacked in this film. You got Paul Rudd playing Scott Lang. You got Academy Award winner Michael Douglas playing the famous Hank Pym, the original Ant-Man, and Evangeline Lilly playing Hope Van Dyne, which is Hank Pym's daughter. Other actors involved in the project were Corey Stoll, who played Yellow Jacket, the main villain of the movie. You had Michael Pena, who played Lewis, who was Scott Lang's associate and a very funny character. Bobby Cannavale, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I hope I am. Judy Greer, even T.I. is in this film. But anyways, it's a stacked cast for a big MCU film that a lot of people are a bit skeptic of, not for just the fact that it's an underrated character or really unknown character, but the whole skepticism with Edgar Wright leaving and having this project kind of hanging in the balance. So a lot to digest when it comes to the production. Originally being pitched in the 80s and then eventually getting pitched in the 2000s into 2010s as a part of the MCU. Edgar Wright going so far as to producing and writing a big chunkage of the film, but eventually leaving due to creative differences. The acquisition of Peyton Reed to follow up with the direction of Ant-Man. Paul Rudd not only starring in this film, but adding his own tidbits in dialogue and in production in this film. And a star-studded cast overall. And a lot of things kind of looming or hanging in the air, hanging in the balance in regards to this film, for the fact that Ant-Man is still a relatively unknown character, and also the loss of Edgar Wright and how much of a gap that's going to be for the overall film. All right, with all that aside, let's go ahead and hit Act 2. Act 2, Execution, Ant-Man, Take 1. So with the fingerprints of Edgar Wright, Peyton Reed, Paul Rudd, you already kind of expect that this film is going to have a little bit more of a lighthearted vibe, right? And you're correct. And boy, not only was this an effective and funny film, I think it's the right dosage of fun and entertainment and lightheartedness to kind of help differentiate it from the rest of the MCU. As I mentioned, the MCU is filled with great tales and tall tales and stories of different characters and different walks of life. From a genius, eccentric billionaire to a frozen World War II captain, to an enraged scientist, to a demigod from a different dimension. So many tall tales, but this one is a little bit more smaller in scale. No pun intended. Here it highlights a man that uses this form of technology as more of a heist-based type of mission or setting or background, if you will. But along the way, there's some jokes, there's some gags, there's some laughter, there's humor, and it presents an aspect and a dimension of the MCU that I said to myself, I'm happy it includes this part and it's not just all serious. Because this film is funny. Like, you can go all the way from just overall charm and the effective execution from Paul Rudd to the character of Lewis acting as a barometer for the spectrum of Ant-Man when it comes to events chronologically. And it's just a fun, joyous kind of feel to his character and what he kind of displays for the entire story. While it is funny, there's also some great action to be seen. I think the whole sequences involving Ant-Man is pretty innovative, along with the CGI. It's like seeing Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, the action movie, the superhero movie. And I think that Peyton Reed, for all intents and purposes of taking over for Edgar Wright, does a great job of kind of balancing everything. You know, I give props where props are due. Kudos to Peyton Reed for masting the ship when there was no captain. And then also to what I think was a great foundation was the amount of heart in this film. What there's a good correlation and parallel was the father-daughter relationship. Scott Lang, played by Paul Rudd, needs to reestablish a relationship with his daughter, Cassie. You know, he's done wrong in his life, but he wants to make right by her and be able to prove to her that she's a hero. But then also on the other side of that coin, you've got Michael Douglas's character, Hank Pym, and him trying to rekindle a relationship with his daughter after the loss of their mother. So on both sides, you see this term of grief, but also this term of kind of catharsis and reconciliation, where they both want to make just for their own personal lives and their own personal relationships with others, and they need each other. And I think that a great little concoction for Ant-Man and such a story that involves a lot of laughs and gags and action, you can really find that little piece of heart and something that you can latch onto and really kind of relate to when it comes to relationships. So I think Ant-Man does a really great job with that. While it's not over the top, you know, rambunctious, great spectacle, it is nice to see this low scale type of locally tall tale, if you will, for the MCU, because others, you know, they have big spectacles, they have big action sequences. This, although it does have some action sequences, it just still feels small, and no pun intended to the Ant-Man character, but I think that's also necessary to kind of allow this MCU, this great conglomerate and this great shared universe to have some type of new barrier and new dimension to showcase themselves and to know that they can spread their wings in this aspect and do it really well. So overall, a real captivating, eye-popping display for a character that should be well known, and I think is going to be well known now because of the film. It's funny, it has gags, laughter, humor, it has great heart and a great story of parallel relationships between fathers and daughters, and great action sequences with great CGI. I think that anyone and everyone involved in this film, either presently or was before, like Edgar Wright, did a great job in doing this film just. And there's really nothing bad I can say about this film. I think that maybe it depended a little too much on the gags. Maybe it latched onto the gags a bit too much, but that's me being really nitpicky. Overall, this film is fun, and I think that it's just a joy to see on screen. Now let's see if my reaction reflects onto the response as we go into Act 3. Act 3, response. Ant-Man, take one. Now, as I had mentioned, this isn't a really well-known property. I think it's a property that people should know about, but they didn't really know about initially going in. So it's not going to be a bigger, you know, rambunctious number as, say, an Iron Man or Captain America. All around the world, cumulatively, the film brought in about $519 million. Fun fact, even though that number isn't really a massive number in scale, if you take into account the budget, or you take into account of advertisement, if you take into account of all the other expenses paid off, as well as the box office revenue, this film was actually a very, very valuable film. So much so, it was ranked in the top 15 of most valuable films of the year 2015. As I mentioned, it's a very lighthearted, very fun film, and I think it reflects with a lot of people in the MCU community who view this film as a more fun, more lighthearted, joyous, and kind of playful type of entry. Now, while that might sound negative or maybe derogatory, it isn't really in reality, because when, like I said, there's so many big tall tales that were shown, it's real nice for a change to see Marvel kind of flip the switch on that and go with something very local and very small and very, very fun and very happy. Right, as I mentioned, $519 million in the box office worldwide, the top 15 and most valuable films in the year, as well as the view of the community of this film being a funny, more lighthearted, less serious film compared to the other ones in the canon. With all that's being said, let's go ahead and hit my verdict for Ant-Man. In hindsight, it almost seemed like it was destined to crash for Ant-Man, with Edgar Wright leaving and really still an unknown nature of how this character would be received in the MCU community. But as far as its overall impression, I think Ant-Man does a great job in showing us who this character is, what the vibe is, what the identity is, and making us feel like, you know, this is something I can still invest in, even though it's not the most serious or the most, you know, perilous of MCU characters or stories. It still possesses a lot of things that I think that make other MCU films great. It has a great story, it has great characters, it has great relationships and chemistry amongst different characters and different relationships throughout the film. As I mentioned, the father-daughter relationship being parallel between the old Ant-Man and the new Ant-Man. Paul Rudd does a phenomenal job leading this performance. Great contribution from Edgar Wright, even though he wasn't a director in this film. His screenplay obviously used, and it was a great screenplay nonetheless. Peyton Reed holding on to the ship, you know, hoisting the mast, making sure everything's balanced, that it's sailed the right way. It's entertaining. The entertainment value is through the roof for this film, whether it be action, comedy, heart, drama. I think it checks off all the boxes. So overall, Ant-Man may not be what you expect to be in a typical MCU film, but it does do a good job in telling you that the MCU does have a different dimension it can reach, a different wing that it can use to fly. And aside from nitpicky things, I don't have any bad things to say about this film. I think this film is wonderful for the setbacks that it had and, you know, what it was working with. I think it did an excellent job. I'm gonna go ahead and give Ant-Man a very good 8.05 out of 10. As I mentioned, this is the 12th film of the MCU, but it is the 13th film that we've gone through overall. Somewhere on this video, you'll see my list thus far, my ranking for the top MCU films. Once again, the films on the bottom or near the bottom of this list, it doesn't mean those are terrible films in my opinion. It just means that the other films above it are much better. So that's my updated list somewhere around here. I'm not sure where, but take a look for yourself. And yeah, that's my ranking so far for the MCU. Let me know what you guys think about Ant-Man. Was there anything interesting that I didn't point out that you'd like to point out? Please put them on the comment section below. Like, share, subscribe. Be sure to follow my Instagram channel at Eugene Reviews for other posts that I'll be putting, like anniversaries of films or top fives for the month. Look out for top 5 recommendations for the month of November. And if you're following along with the chronological order of the MCU, you know that we're going to be entering in phase 3, and I'm going to be starting that next week, as I'm going to kind of squeeze in another MCU film just before the Thanksgiving week. And just as an alert, I'm not going to be doing another video on Thanksgiving week. I just feel that's necessary, not only for people celebrating the holidays, but for me, I need a little bit of rest too. So no new video on Thanksgiving week. Enjoy your Thanksgiving break, enjoy your Thanksgiving holiday with your family and friends, and remember to do it safely and, you know, with the right practice, especially with the pandemic going on. But until then, that's another episode wrapped up for Eugene Reviews. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and I hope you guys enjoy watching this as much as I've been doing it. Please continue to support, whether it be this channel, whether it be my Instagram channel. Any and all help, any and all comments, any and all mentions, you know, is welcome, and I'm thankful for it. Thank you guys for everything thus far. This has been fun for the past 6 months already, doing these videos. Right now I'm doing these for fun, and I want to keep continuing doing these, and for sure I'll have a set schedule for December coming in, as well as the new year, for new videos to be released soon, so be on the lookout for that. But yeah, this is fun. So let's continue practicing social distancing, wearing a mask. Let's continue the process of healing as a nation now that we've elected a new representative, a new leader at the White House. No, it's not. Yep, just shut up. And yeah, thank you guys so much. Thank you for tuning in again. This is Eugene signing off for another episode of Eugene Reviews. And once again, I will see you guys next week for a brand new video. And that is a wrap. Son of a man.